Shalom, everyone. This is Rabbi Stuart Darrellman at Interfaithfulness, where we're building bridges, where history builds walls. We've been looking at the first century Mediterranean family as a model for the communities that Yeshua founded and that the Apostle Paul founded. And we haven't been very happy with some of the things we've discovered, to tell you the truth, because they seem so hardline. It seems so hardline to say that one's spiritual family and our loyalties to our spiritual family need to take precedence over all other loyalties. It's hard for us to think about a Jesus who says, "He who loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me." It seems offensive for us to have a situation where you have a Jesus who people say to him, "Look, your mother and your brothers are outside." And he says, "Who are my mother and my brothers? Whoever does the word of God and keeps it, they're my mother and my brothers." These things offend us. And in order for us to deal with that, I suggest we need to know something more about the context in which they were said, because when we understand the context, we understand the meaning a lot differently. So we're going to do that today. We're going to be looking at the issue of discipleship in a pagan context. We're going to be looking at a number of people, and here they are. Marcus of Thena, who lived about 250 of the Common Era. Julian the Apostate, who lived just about 80 years later, and who ruled over Rome 100 years later. Then Perpetua, who lived before Marcus, she lived about 200 of the Common Era, and Rabbi Akiva, who lived earlier still. We'll look at each of them in turn, and we're going to learn something about the spiritual environment in which these volatile things were said. Let's start with Marcus. Marcus was a professional actor, a Roman actor. He lived in Thena, which was a suburb of Carthage, modern Tunis. Marcus was attracted to believing in Jesus, and this, by the way, is a pseudonym. We know his story, but we don't know his name. We're going to call him Marcus. Marcus was attracted to believing in Jesus, but the problem was he was an actor in the Roman theater, which was rather bawdy and which the Christians could not approve of under any circumstances. So in order for him to become a believer, Marcus had to give up his career as an actor. He did. But then he had a problem. How does he eat? Well, he opened up a school for actors. And his pastor, whose name was Eucratius up here, Eucratius was very troubled by this. He thought for a moment, if we told him that he can't really be an actor and be a member of our community, how can we allow him to train others to be actors? And so Eucratius was quite disturbed by this, and he contacted the local big shot in the area, Cyprian of Carthage, a man of great stature. And Cyprian agreed with Eucratius. No, this fellow Marcus cannot be allowed to train actors as his livelihood. But then Cyprian said something else, and we have all of this in letters, by the way. Cyprian said, "If you at your community cannot support this man, then we here in Carthage will support him." In other words, he's obliged to give up his job as an actor, obliged to give up his work as a trainer of actors. He's not going to be left out in the cold. The community will support him. And if the community cannot, then this other community of believers said, "We will do it." That is familial solidarity. That's the way families were. When somebody fell down in the family, someone was in need, someone in the family, without a question, the family stuck together and took care of each other. The same was true in spiritual families. Then we have a fellow named Julian the Apostate. That was not his real name. It's what they called him behind his back. He had a more, shall I say, elegant name. Let's look at it right now. His name was Flavius Claudius Julianus, also known as Julian the Apostate. He lived from 332 to 363. He was a nephew of the famous Emperor Constantine. Constantine had become a Christian, But Flavius, Claudius Julianus, Julian the Apostate, wanted to return to paganism. That's why he has that name. And he was very disturbed about the progress of this faith in Jesus in the Roman world. He became the emperor, but he was still very disturbed. And he wrote to a friend of his, and he said this. He says, why do we not observe that it is that's these Christians, these Jesus believers, it's their benevolence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives. He said it's pretended. Nobody can be that holy. That have done the most to increase atheism, which he refers to faith in Jesus as atheism, because anybody who doesn't believe in the Roman gods, obviously, is an atheist. This has done the most to increase atheism when the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well. All men see that our people lack aid from us. So he's saying, these believers in Jesus are making us look bad. They take care of the graves of the dead, they're kind to strangers, and they take care of the poor, but not only their poor, they take care of the pagan poor. And we can't keep up with them. So you see, this familial solidarity, the early believers in Yeshua took care of their own, and they even extended this familial solidarity to people on the outside. That's when this is what Yeshua meant when he said, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. And this is how love looked. Let's look at another name, and that's Perpetua. Let me put her name up here again. Perpetua lived about 200 of the Common Era, so she lived about 130 years before Julian the Apostate. She lived under another wicked emperor named Severus Septimus. And he wanted to stamp out Christianity. In Carthage, where Perpetua lived, the local governor was named Hilarion, and he sought to enforce the emperor's edict. And so he arrested a number of young people who had signed on with the local Christian community to be discipled in order that they could be baptized and become members of the community. Among these was a young woman named Perpetua, who was about 20 years old, maybe 21. She was a mother of a newborn child. She came from a prominent family. And all she had to do was say that she was giving up being a Christian. Or all she had to do was simply burn a pinch of incense before a bust of Caesar, which was a way of showing respect for the gods of Rome. And then she'd go free and be able to go home and take care of her baby and be with her family. Her father came and pled with her. Her father was a well-to-do pagan. He pleaded with her. He said, haven't I been kinder to you than to your siblings? Don't your mother and I love you? Don't we love you? Haven't I always treated you well? Just give up this nonsense. Come home. Just burn a pinch of incense to Caesar, and let's be done with this. Perpetua said, no, I can't. She said, Father, you see this object over here? What is it? He said, it's a vase. She said, right, it's a vase. No matter what you call it, that's what it is. And Father, no matter what you call me, I am a believer in Jesus. He kept coming. He told her, look, your baby will die, because she was nursing the child. He would bring the baby to the prison so she could nurse it. But she said, no, I can't. So she and the other 5 people, including her maid, whose name was Felicitas, they went into the Roman arena where the crowds were screaming for blood. It's hard to imagine what that society was like. They're in there in the arena, and first Perpetua was attacked by a heifer, a huge animal that attacked her, and then a leopard set on her, a hungry leopard. And then she and the other 5 stood and allowed themselves to be killed with a Roman sword. What was this about? It was about a certain kind of spiritual family loyalty spiritual family solidarity, that we who are believers in Yeshua do not abandon the family under any kind of pressure. And you see that for her, this allegiance to Yeshua, her elder brother, and her father, God, in heaven, this allegiance trumped her allegiance even to her own family, her own father. This is what Yeshua was preparing people for when he said, anyone who doesn't love father or mother, anyone who loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, because he knew that they would be facing precisely this kind of pressure. One more example, not a believer in Yeshua. This is the justly famous Rabbi Akiva, another window on the times when this was happening. Rabbi Akiva lived earlier than this. Let's look at this. Rabbi Akiva lived from 50 to 135. The Talmud describes his bitter end. He was incarcerated and tried by the Romans for his crime of publicly teaching Torah and participation in the Bar Kokhba revolt. He was found guilty as charged. They tortured him to death, flaying off his skin with iron combs in the heat of the fire, which is completely unimaginable to us. He spent his final moments on earth reciting the Shema, accepting upon himself the yoke of heaven, and his disciples asked him, our teacher, this far? You'll go this far with your faith in God? And he answered, the Shema teaches us to love God with all our souls, which I understood to mean even if they are taking your soul. My entire life I agonized over this verse. Would I really love God, even if my soul were being taken? I at last have the opportunity to demonstrate this. How could I not do so now? He was grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate that he loved God with all his soul. And as he recited Adonai Echad, he died. So we've learned a lot about spiritual priorities as they existed amongst spiritual families in the early centuries against the heel of pagan Rome. We saw how Akiva's faithfulness to his Father in heaven trumped all other loyalties. We saw how Perpetua was faithful to her Father in heaven and to the group of believers to whom she was called, even against the protestations of her own earthly father and her family. We've seen something of why Yeshua and Paul established a hard boundary, because they knew that people would be obliged to stand for their faith against the cruelest of pressures. So now maybe we're more tolerant of views that at first shocked us and we weren't sure we liked. But context sometimes is everything. Come back next time and we'll talk more about the family as the backbone of the community of the people of God. Shalom for now, from Interfaithfulness, where we're building bridges, where history builds walls.